Hey, welcome to this Wealthsimple review. Today we're going to be chopping up Wealthsimple. We're going to see what's under the hood, see how it compares. So what's really interesting about Wealthsimple is the fact that it can be used in different countries. Most robo-advisors are really country specific. So Wealthsimple is very different in that front. I can have a Wealthsimple account in the United States, which is where I'm from. You can have a Wealthsimple account in Canada and in the UK. So it's very interesting that you can have accounts in different countries, but the fact is some countries are going to be better to have Wealthsimple than others. So keep watching, and by the end of this, we're going to see the clear winner in which country has the best Wealthsimple account. So you know Wealthsimple is a robo-advisor. And now when you open up an account with Wealthsimple, you're going to be asked some questions. So some of these questions are going to be how old you are, and some of them are going to be, would you sell if the market lost 20%? Would you buy if the market lost 20%? So what they're trying to do is they're going to try to gauge your risk tolerance when you open an account. And this is going to pretty much set the trajectory of your account. So for example, if you're 20 years old, they're going to probably put you more into stocks or ETFs that are invested amongst stocks, which are equities. Or if you're maybe a little older, you're going to probably be more conservative. So maybe you're going to have a little less money in stocks, maybe a little more money in bonds, invested through ETFs, of course. So Wealthsimple is trying to figure out your risk tolerance. And that's one of the things about robo-advisors is they're going to manage your money and your asset allocation, which is how much money goes into these different types of assets, so bonds or stocks, and they're gonna manage that for you. Now, what's kind of interesting about Wealthsimple is that depending on the country, you're gonna have a different asset allocation. So let's take a look real quick at the asset allocations in the United States. So this is an example of an account in the United States. Now this is a conservative account, and the first thing you see is a 9% US stock allocation, 9% in foreign stocks, 9% in global stocks, 4% emerging markets, 49% in municipal bonds, and then you have 11% in both US government bonds and US bonds. So this is an example of an account of someone who's conservative. So if you live in the US and now you have a balanced portfolio instead of a conservative portfolio, it's gonna be invested in 15% stocks, 15% foreign bonds, 10% global stocks, 10% emerging markets, 20% municipal bonds, and 15% government bonds and USIL bonds. And finally, when we go over to the growth portfolio, you'll see that it has the least amount in bonds and the most amount in stocks. So 25% in US stocks and foreign stocks, 15% in global stocks, 15% emerging markets. There's no municipal bonds anymore, and if you remember, a conservative portfolio has 49%, and then 10% US government bonds, 10% USIL bonds. Now, one of the interesting things about the United States is, as you can see, even if you're a growth investor, there's still going to be bonds in your portfolio. And in fact, there's quite a bit of bonds in a portfolio for someone who might not be very conservative of an investor. If you're 20 years old, do you really want to have 20% of your money in bonds? So this is something to think about if you live in the US and you're more of a growth investor. All right, so let's look at a Canadian account. So if we start with the risk level being conservative, in Canada, you're gonna have 22% government bonds, 38% aggregate bonds, 11% US bonds, 9% emerging markets, 6% foreign stocks, 9% global stocks, 4% US stocks, and 2% Canadian stocks. Now if we go to a more balanced portfolio, there's 18% government bonds, so less bonds than a conservative portfolio, 10% aggregate bonds, 12% USIL bonds, 15% emerging markets, 13% foreign stocks, 10% global stocks, 15% US stocks, and 7% Canadian stocks. And now when we go to a Canadian growth account, there's 11% government bonds and 4% USIL bonds. So what's interesting is that if you remember in the United States, 20% of your money is gonna go in between different bonds. Now in Canada, you're actually gonna have 15% bonds in a growth portfolio. So again, you might want to ask yourself, if you're young and you don't care about having bonds in your portfolio, do you really like this asset allocation? And if it's okay with you, then no problem. And then finally, if we go to the UK account, we can see a conservative blend of stocks and bonds has 80% total bonds, 20% stocks. Then when we move over to the moderate account, we can see a 60% stock, 40% bond mix. And then finally, when we get to the growth account, what's very interesting is that it's a 100% stock account. Now this is actually very different than the mix we saw in the US account, which had a growth account of 80% stocks, 20% bonds, and also the Canadian account, which had 85% stocks, 15% bonds. So the UK account doesn't actually have bonds for a growth portfolio, which actually might be more in line with someone who's into growth investing. So of course, when it comes to robo-advisors, you're gonna wanna know the fee that they're gonna charge. So let's take a look at the different fees in different countries. So if we start with the US, you'll see that there's different tiers of Wealthsimple. You can have a basic account, a black account, or a generation account. Now, if you have less than $100,000, the fee for Wealthsimple is going to be 0.50%. If you have over $100,000, that 0.50 is going to reduce to 0.40%. And then if you have a generation, it's also going to be 0.40%. Now, if we look at Canada, the fees are the same as in the US. So the basic account is 0.50% management fee, black is 0.40%, and generation is 0.40%. And when we get over to the UK, it's actually a little bit higher. So the basic account is 0.7%, the black for over £100,000 is 0.5%, and the generation account for 500,000 plus is going to be 0.5%. Okay, so in terms of fees, the first thing we can see is that Wealthsimple is a little bit high compared to some other accounts in the US. Now in the US, we have a lot more competition for robo-advisors and the fees have reduced quite a bit. So right now with a Wealthfront account, for example, it's 0.25%. Whereas Wealthsimple is 0.5% if you have less than $100,000. So Wealthsimple is going to be a little bit higher of a fee in the US. However, in Canada and in the UK, because your fees aren't quite as low as here in the US, it's actually quite a good bet for you to have a Wealthsimple account as opposed to a different account. So when it comes to fees in Canada and the UK, robo-advisors actually have less competition, and because of that, your fees tend to be higher in general. And for that reason, Wealthsimple is actually very competitive to have an account in Canada or the UK. Okay, so those are the fees, and we should also mention that there's actually no minimum that you need with Wealthsimple, so you can start with any amount you want to. So now let's talk about the different accounts available with Wealthsimple. So you may or may not know this, but every country has their own unique tax advantage type of accounts. So Wealthsimple has pretty much all of the normal and major accounts that you can invest in. So whether you're in the US, Canada, or the UK, you're gonna have the ability to open a basic account. And this is gonna be an account that's basically a taxable brokerage account that you invest money in. It's liquid, you can take it out, but you'll have to pay capital gains on it when you sell. Now, some unique accounts offered in the United States are an IRA, a Roth IRA, a SEP IRA, a joint account, and a trust account. In Canada, there's an RRSP available, TFSA, RESP, RRIF, LIRA, and a joint account. And in the UK, there's a pension, an ISA, and a JISA. So when it comes to Wealthsimple in any of these countries, you're gonna have pretty much any account available for you. I know in the US, one account that it is lacking is a 529 plan, which allows you to save for college, but besides that, it's got everything you need in the US. So something that's very attractive with Wealthsimple can unfortunately only be found in Canada. So for us in the United States, and those in the UK, unfortunately you can't have access to this. But if you live in Canada, you can have access to an account that allows you to buy and sell stocks, ETFs, and REITs for free. Now in the US, we have something called Robinhood and M1 Finance, and even Charles Schwab. They all allow you to buy and sell stocks with no commission. So if you have Wealthsimple in Canada, you can actually have access to this, which is a huge benefit. Now if you live in the US or Canada, there's also a cash account available for you. And if you live in Canada, you actually have the ability to file your taxes through Wealthsimple. Another huge benefit of Wealthsimple is that it allows you to have access to financial advisors. So in the United States, most robo-advisors don't allow access to financial advisors. It's all just done via computer and algorithm. But for example, with Betterment, you can have access to a financial advisor, but it's gonna cost you an extra fee. So to have a Betterment account with financial advisor it's gonna cost you 0.4%, which is the same as the Betterment Black account. Also, if you live in Canada or the US, there's a really interesting tool that allows you to invest your spare change. In the US, we have something called Acorns, which does something similar, but this is a great tool if you want to automatically have your money that you spend during the week round up and then send into your Wealthsimple account. Wealthsimple also has the tools that many robo-advisors have, such as dividend reinvestment and rebalancing. And if you're not sure what rebalancing is, to make it easy and simple, assume you have an account with 50% stocks and 50% bonds. Imagine that your stocks, because they outperform your bonds, grow to 60% of your portfolio, and your bonds are now only 40% of your portfolio. You're now theoretically taking more risk than maybe you should be. So Wealthsimple will rebalance that back into a 50% stocks, 50% bond portfolio. Another great advantage for Wealthsimple is that there's socially responsible investing. So if there are companies that you would rather not invest in, like tobacco companies or oil companies, a socially responsible investing strategy will allow you to do so. And this is available in the US, the UK, and Canada, but be mindful that this does cost a little bit more than the normal ETFs that are available for you. Also, Wealthsimple has Halal investing, which is a Sharia compliant portfolio. So this portfolio actually complies with Islamic law. So if that's something that's really important to you, then this is a company that does offer something pretty great. Some other good added benefits for Wealthsimple are a free portfolio review. So if you want them to look at your current portfolio before you transfer money to them, they'll do so. They'll also cover any fees from other brokers to send to Wealthsimple. And they have auto deposit, so you can deposit money from your account every month or every week, however often you want to. So those are some of the important benefits of Wealthsimple. Now the question is Wealthsimple the best in the US, Canada, or the UK? So let's start with the US. So when it comes to the United States, Wealthsimple has a few problems, and that is that the management fee is a little bit high for the US. So having a 0.40 or 0.50% management fee, it's probably a little high. Now, there is a caveat. If you want a financial advisor to have access to, then that might be something that you would be willing to pay an extra percentage for. If that's the case, maybe Wealthsimple is okay for you. Also, having socially responsible investing is great, but in the US, you have that ability too with Betterment. So again, if you want a financial advisor or the ability to talk to a financial advisor, then maybe Wealthsimple is a good robo-advisor for you. Next, is Wealthsimple a good robo-advisor in the UK? So because fees for robo-advisors in the UK aren't quite as low as they are in the US, Wealthsimple is actually a pretty good tool to have over there. Unfortunately, you don't have access to everything that they have in Canada, but really they have all the main abilities. You can rebalance your portfolio, you can invest in a socially responsible investing account, and so there are some things that are really good for the UK accounts with Wealthsimple. So when it comes to Wealthsimple in the UK, it's actually a pretty good deal. Reason being is because management fees in the UK are not quite as low as in the US, so it actually makes sense for the management fee that they're charging. So you get things like socially responsible investing, dividend reinvesting, and all sorts of other things like rebalancing. So maybe in the UK, it might be a good idea to have a Wealthsimple account. Okay, so this leaves Canada. And as you probably realized by now, Canada is the best country to have a Wealthsimple account. Now, reason being, there's all sorts of great tools that are available with Wealthsimple. There's things like commission-free trading, you can invest your spare change, socially responsible investing, halal investing. So basically, Canada has everything that you need when it comes to the robo-advisor, and the fee is actually really competitive in the country. So for 0.4%, 0.5%, it's actually a really good deal in Canada. Now, I'd also love to hear from you in the comments whether or not you're opening a Wealthsimple account or if you have an account in the US, Canada, or the UK. Now, if you want to support the channel, I would really appreciate it, and it'd be great if you do sign up with Wealthsimple. I have a little affiliate link below. It actually supports my small YouTube channel, so that would be greatly appreciated. And that's all we have for today's video. So, we'll see you next time.